Hello and welcome to the Bucketlister Podcast. Join your host Keith Crockford along with special guests who have travelled the world, here to share stories of their adventures and plenty of inspo to add to your bucket list. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Hello everyone and welcome to this episode of the Bucketlister Podcast. I am your host Keith Crockford and today I am chatting with Sean Allt. Hello Sean.
Hello, Keith. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And obviously, anyone listening to Sean then would have just realised that as most of my guests are based in the UK, Sean is not based in the UK. Where are you, Sean?
I am in British Columbia, Canada.
Well, interestingly, you're the second Canadian we have interviewed in the last couple of months. Because obviously we interviewed, for those that listen regularly, we interviewed Mark, who's currently cycling down from Canada down to Aconcagua. And we're following his journey. But interestingly, I sort of came across Sean a few weeks ago, and we've been trying to get this podcast together for a while and getting the timings right. But what interested me about Sean was in his bio, it was helping busy professionals conquer their bucket list adventures. And I kind of thought, well, who better to bring on to the Bucket List podcast than someone who helps people conquer their bucket list adventures? So, Sean, what is it you do to help busy people? Because a lot of the people that are listening to this are busy people. So what is it you do to help them conquer their bucket list of dreams and adventures?
So my background, Keith, is health and fitness and nutrition. I've been a one-on-one coach and personal trainer for over 15 years now. And really what I do to help those busy professionals conquer those bucket list adventures is simplify the process as much as humanly possible, weed through all of the confusion and, all the conflicting information that's out there, and make sure that my clients that I'm working with have crystal clarity in terms of what do I need to be doing on a daily basis from a workout standpoint, from a nutrition standpoint, from a lifestyle standpoint, to best set me up for success when I go to take that trip, to make sure that I have the physical capacity, the endurance, the stamina to be able to not only be successful on my trip, but to have a level of physical capacity and fitness that allows me to actually enjoy the experience and not have it just be something that I suffer through to check the box and say that I did it.
Yeah, I think that's really important that you mentioned that there, because people always say to me, I want to do Kilimanjaro, I want to do Everest Base Camp. How fit do you need to be to do it? And it's kind of the wrong way to approach it, I always think. And I say, well, anybody could go and do Kilimanjaro. Anybody could go and do Everest Base Camp. But the actual enjoyment level you're going to get out of it is not going to be there if you're not in the right shape before you start.
100%, right? There's, in the outdoor adventure community, there's this concept of type 2 fun, right? Which is the idea of it sucks while I'm doing it, but I can look back on it and say, yeah, I did it. That was cool. It's a memory I created or what have you, right? But I would much rather be having fun in the traditional sense, right? Like I would like to be able to be physically present in the moment while I'm on that adventure and actually acknowledging the things that I'm experiencing, having a level of mindfulness to be in the moment and actually, soaking everything in, as opposed to just redlining it, pain cave, staring at my feet, one foot in front of the other. Oh, great. I made it to base camp, but I don't remember anything from the last 6 hours on the trek getting here. Or
for some people, Sean, that's 6 days they don't remember it for. So 6 hours.
Oh, totally. Totally. And again, it depends entirely on the particular adventure. I had a friend, I don't recall which summit he did, but he sent me a video of him at the summit with his Sherpa. And I sent him a message back and I was like, hey, how was it? He goes, honestly, I have no idea. The only reason that I know that I was successful is the fact that I shot that video and I have that video record of me standing on the summit, because I have no actual memories of that experience.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've taken people up Kilimanjaro. I mean, I've had people get to the airport with me before and go, yeah, I had loads of plans to do some training for this trip, but kind of time got away from me. And here we are now, and I'm just going to go and see how I get on. And, they managed to do it. But like you say, they probably didn't enjoy it as much as they could have done if they were in a good shape beforehand. Obviously, it's quite a niche that you're in, Sean, in terms of, the bucket list adventure. How did that come about in terms of obviously being a PT, but how was it that you suddenly decided that this was the niche you were going to go down and work with people who had these kind of crazy ideas to go and do amazing things?
It was a happy coincidence, was what it was, is how it came to be. So when I first became a personal trainer, when I first started focusing on one-on-one coaching, the very first client that I ever worked with, when we walked through the door, I remember him well. It was 16 years ago. His name was Norm. And he told me, he said, Sean, I'm a busy professional. I'm an executive. I work 60, 80, sometimes more hour weeks. It has been years since I've taken, a proper vacation and disconnected. I have plans to take a ski trip to the Swiss Alps in a few months. And I want to make sure that my physical capacity is not a limiting factor. I want to be able to ride hard, ski hard all day, every day while I'm there, not worry about running out of energy, not worry about getting myself injured. What can we do to set me up for success with that? So we put a plan in place. He was very diligent in terms of showing up for all of his workouts. And, there were some nutritional strategies that we had put in place as well to make sure that he was recovering as well as he could. He went, he had his trip, he came back. He told me, Sean, that was amazing. That was exactly what I needed. Thank you so much. I want to do it again. I want to do a different adventure this time. This time I want to go, kite surfing in the Dominican Republic. Can we put a plan in place to get me ready for that? Yes, absolutely, Norm. I would love to. A couple of months later, I had a different new client come through the door who was, he was doing his PhD at the time. And as part of his PhD studies, one of the tasks that he had set for himself was going to some of the mountain monasteries in Nepal and conducting some interviews with some of the monks that live there. He was fresh back from that trip. And unfortunately, he was unsuccessful on that trip because he planned all of his logistics. He had, all of his questions laid out, everything that he wanted to talk to them about. He had, arranged for the Sherpa and all of that. What he forgot to factor in was the physical capacity or the fitness side of things. And so he actually, never made it all the way up to the monasteries that he had set out to do. In fact, he said one of the most embarrassing things that ever happened to him was the moment that the Sherpa turned to him and asked him, how much do you weigh? And he said, about 220 pounds. And the Sherpa says, okay, I'll carry you. Because he was struggling that badly, right? And so he basically said, like, I couldn't accept that. I said, no, I'm not going to let you carry me. I would rather turn back at this point. But as soon as he got back to Canada, he realized, okay, this is something I need to do, and I need to deal with my physical capacity to make sure that I'm ready to do that. So he enlisted my services. Again, we spent several months training him up, getting him to a level of physical fitness that he felt confident going and reattempting that. And he did his interviews, he finished his PhD. And I mean, it's 15 years later now, and he's a professor at one of the universities in Ontario, teaching the very stuff that he was studying at that time. So, those were two out of my first three clients when I first started as a personal trainer, and it just sort of snowballed from there.
Yeah. And I suppose, having a niche is always good in terms of business, isn't it? Like, if you are the person that deals with those things, they're going to come to you. If you're just a standard PT, well, there are thousands of standard PTs. So, if people are searching for, they want to do Everest Base Camp, Kilimanjaro, Denali, Aconcagua, one of those challenges, if they're searching for that, then, you're going to appear in, and you've got the experience in the knowledge to put them through that. Now, from our perspective at the Bucket List Company, obviously a lot of the challenges you're preparing people for from a trekking perspective are the same as the challenges that we are doing. And having been on many of these trips before with lots of our clients kind of fall into the bracket that you're talking about, busy professional people. And the reason why they come and book a trip with, companies like the Bucket List Company is because they want everything organized for them, because they are busy people. They've got 2 weeks, 3 weeks vacation, and they want to do something, but they want somebody else to organize it for them, which is exactly what we do. But in terms of those busy people, where do you start with them, getting them ready for those challenges? Because we get so many people come to us saying, I'd love to do Kilimanjaro, I'd love to do Everest Base Camp, but I just don't know where to start. Like, what would your advice be to those people?
Well, I mean, what I can do for you right now is I can just sort of outline my process of, what is the information I'm looking to gather from these people, and how do we then utilize that to set them up for success, right? And anytime I start working with a new client, we start with a fairly comprehensive intake questionnaire where we're looking at their lifestyle, their nutrition, their schedule, their exercise history, where their physical fitness is at right now. We usually do a movement screen as well, so I can see how their body is moving, if they have any compensations, or if they have any movement limitations or that type of thing that might present as challenges for them. And really, we work to identify what are the biggest areas of opportunity here, or what are the biggest levers that we could pull based on your individual circumstances to, start moving the needle in the right direction and improving your fitness and capacity from a minimal input for maximum output standpoint. All right. And for some people, this might mean, okay, we just need to get you moving more, right? Like, you're a sedentary individual, you work long hours at a desk. What can we do to just start building some baseline physical capacity? And for some people, that might mean, okay, we're going to do very structured workouts, or we're going to follow a very structured cardiovascular plan. For other people, it might be something as simple as, okay, we're just going to work in, a couple of walks during the day, just to start that ball rolling and start creating a little bit of capacity where you don't currently have it, right? But I mean, big things that I'm looking for is, the ability to move your body through a wide variety of movement patterns without pain and without restriction, because we know that the more efficient your body is at moving, the more efficient it's going to be at using the available energy as well, right? So if your body moves better, it can be, you require less energy or less output to actually accomplish the task that you're trying to accomplish. So if we need to clean up some movement patterns, we clean up some movement patterns. If we need to start by building a big, broad aerobic base, then that's what we do. For any of my clients that are working towards an altitude related goal, so talking about, Everest, Denali, Aconcagua, even Kili, like a lot of those types of places, I have them complete what's called a body oxygen level test, which is a very, very simple test, but it's a good just sort of baseline litmus test for how well your body is going to tolerate the lower oxygen environment. And depending on how they score on that, we may need to look at just improving your breathing efficiency and your breathing mechanics as, one of those lowest level things that we can work on that can yield a very, very big result when you go to altitude, right? So if we can improve your body's efficiency at using the oxygen that you are taking in, then when there is less of that oxygen, you are still going to perform better than you would otherwise, right? So oftentimes I have people that live and train at sea level that are trying to prepare for these adventures that are at altitude. And that's one of the biggest levers that we can actually pull on top of just like general fitness is, there are specific breathwork exercises and that type of stuff that will help them prepare for handling those lower oxygen saturation levels at altitude.
Yeah, that's really interesting because obviously, a lot of our listeners, we're in the UK. A lot of our listeners are in the UK. We don't have altitude in the UK. So, many of the people listening now are sat there going, well, I live at 30 meters above sea level. Like, how can I train and do anything? And, we've done some podcasts with the Altitude Center and looked at going in and working with those guys there. But what is it you then actually do with your guys to help improve that process?
For like handling the higher altitude?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so the Bolt score, it's a very simple test. Basically, we have you sit and relax and just breathe normally through your nose for 5 minutes. At the end of a natural exhale, we just have you hold your breath and plug your nose. When you feel that first natural urge to breathe, you breathe in normally through your nose. And if you're able to just sort of immediately return into just like a regular breathing rhythm from there, then that's a good indication that, okay, that was the appropriate amount of time for you. If you find yourself like trying to really catch your breath afterwards, that gave us an invalid score because you actually held your breath for too long, right? So depending on what someone's score is on that, and we just use based on time, that will drive or that will dictate what the protocols look like from there to improve. So someone that has a score of less than 20 seconds needs a different approach compared to someone that has a score of, let's say, 35 seconds. So if someone has a score of, less than 20 seconds, we may just be looking at simple things such as being purposeful about breathing through your nose throughout the day, right? And this is where something like mouth taping can come into the equation. If someone notices, hey, I'm a chronic mouth breather, I breathe through my mouth a lot, I don't even realize that I'm doing it. Mouth taping can help bring a certain level of awareness to that and force you to breathe through your nose a little bit more, right? There are some, baseline breath hold exercises that we can do to begin to improve your body's tolerance for not only the deprivation of oxygen, but also the accumulation of CO2 in your bloodstream, because that accumulation of CO2 triggers a reflex in your body to actually draw more of the oxygen out of your blood, out of circulation, and into the working muscles. So that's one of the ways in which we can increase the efficiency is through doing some of that simple breath hold training. We can increase the body's efficiency at utilizing the oxygen that you are taking in. If you were at a higher level, like let's say, your Bolt score was in the 30s, then we want to look at increasing the capacity demands in that, lower oxygen environment. So we may pair that breath hold type exercise with, cardiovascular training at the same time. So where, traditionally, people think of interval training as I go hard, I go easy, I go hard, I go easy. We may have you just like, holding a steady pace, but incorporating some breath holds into that. So we might say, every minute on the minute, you're going to perform a breath hold with empty lungs. Your goal is to maintain your current pace. So if you're like on a bike, as an example, you're trying to maintain the cadence, maintain the power output, while holding your breath with empty lungs for as long as possible. And then when you feel like you need to take that breath, you take that breath, you recover for 1 to 2 minutes and repeat that process, right? So there are, those are just two examples of things that we could do depending on someone's capacity when we do that assessment, right?
Perfect. Thanks for that. And then one thing that, when people come to me and say, how should I be training for, an Everest base camp, Kilimanjaro style trek? Like I say to people that, the distances that you're doing each day are not excessive. It's what you would be able to manage. If you went out for a day's walking, the majority of people could walk those distances. And what I say to people is the bit that people don't train for and the bit that people really struggle with is the trekking day after day after day after day. That's the bit where I think people need to work on. And obviously, like you've just said, you work with busy people who haven't got the time to go trekking day after day after day after day. So what advice would you give to those people who would maybe, you think of an Everest base camp trek, it's 13 days. like they're walking every day, day after day. What could you do? What could a busy person do to prepare for that when they are working 60, 70-hour weeks, Monday to Friday, they might get one day off a week. Like, what can those people do to prepare for that?
Yeah. So some of the simple things that we look at is just where can we make little modifications in your daily routine to get you spending more time on your feet and more time walking around, right? So, one quick lever that I often encourage people to try and pull if they're able to is walking meetings or standing meetings, right? So oftentimes when people are, in the business setting, they just sort of have this idea in your mind, hey, I'm on a call, so I'm sitting at my desk. Or, I'm having a meeting, so we're meeting in the boardroom, right? If you have the opportunity, could you take that phone call from your cell phone? And even if you're still in your office, like even if you still need the controlled environment, can you be standing up and just pacing back and forth and that type of thing, right? Do you have the opportunity to use a standing desk for more time during the day as opposed to sitting at your desk, right? So that's something that I do for myself quite regularly. I've got a sit-stand desk, and depending on what particular task I'm working on at the time, I'll either be sitting or standing, but I try and make a point of spending more time standing compared to sitting, right? Again, I'm on calls much of the day. I'm on Zoom, so I am kind of tethered to my desk in that way when I'm meeting and speaking with my clients. But that doesn't mean that I have to be sitting, right? I have the opportunity. I can be standing. I can be moving around. I can be shifting my weight, that type of thing, right? Other stuff is just, some of the classic health and fitness, prescriptions that we hear and we've heard for years and years and years, and we tend to dismiss as being overly simple. But something like, when you drive to the grocery store, park at the far end of the parking lot instead of the closest spot that you can find to the door, right? Or if you take public transit, can you get off one or two stops before your actual destination and just add that little bit of walking, right? I know 5-10 minutes doesn't seem like a lot, but if you can add 5-10 minutes here, 5-10 minutes there, it does add up over time, right? And the last thing we want to do is take someone who is, sedentary, sitting for 8-10 plus hours a day and put that demand on them that, hey, now you need to walk for 13 days straight, right? We need to just get them used to bearing their own weight first and foremost for more hours in the day. And then looking at potentially adding in, hey, are we going to add a little bit of a weighted pack or a weighted vest or something like that into the mix, where again, you're just sort of going about your regular daily routine, but you're getting used to bearing more weight, bearing more load, bearing more work as you do it.
Yeah, because I think that's the other thing that I say to people is, they're not necessarily carrying, on our treks anyway, because, we have got porters carrying the bags, they are just carrying their day pack. But ultimately, if you're carrying 3 liters of water in a spare jacket in some snacks, like you're easily putting 5-6K on your back. And if that's not something you're regularly used to doing and you're doing that for 13 days, you do need a stronger core. You do need a strong back. You do need strong legs just to keep you upright in terms of walking for that amount of time and distance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there is a ton of value in adding, structured strength training above and beyond those modifications that we already talked about. And the vast majority of the people that I work with, we do have them on a structured strength and cardiovascular training program. But again, if they are limited in the amount of time that they have to dedicate to those things specifically, then we look at, obviously a lot of the stuff that we just outlined in terms of, okay, let's say we're limited to, you can only give me, 3 or 4 hours a week of structured time towards, your physical preparation. How do we modify your environment? How do we modify your routine to sneak a little more activity in there, right? Just to build your body's overall capacity and overall tolerance. But yeah, 100%, all of the people that I work with are doing at least some level of structured core strengthening, postural integrity work, that type of stuff, strengthening their legs so that they're ready for those demands once they get on trail.
Because a lot of people kind of don't really, the Inca Trail is probably one of the hardest ones for steps. But those steps kill a lot of people, not even so much the walking up the steps, the walking down the steps. I mean, they call it, the gringo killer in Peru because, Western people just aren't used to that many steps and the size of the steps and the different sizes of the steps. And, if anyone's got any knee problems, like they really do struggle with that on the Inca Trail, I find. And I think, like you say, doing some squats, really does help strengthen those legs to allow you not just walking up hills, but walking down hills as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so again, with any of the clients that I'm working with that are planning for, trekking, backpacking, like any of those types of adventures, we're always looking at not like people often think of like doing exercises like step ups. I tend to focus more on step downs, right? Like we start you on an elevated surface and work on that stepping down and just managing that, lowering your weight under your own body weight, maybe with some additional load, and just building some repetitions and some resilience for that, and making sure you're able to maintain good positioning and good alignment, making sure you've got good ankle stability, making sure you've got good knee stability and hip stability as you do those things, so that as you add up, a couple thousand steps over the course of a trek, you're in a good, strong, advantageous position as you're doing that. You're not just wreaking havoc on your joints. Because I mean, to your point, it's rarely the up that actually gives people the biggest challenges when it comes to their legs. At least it's the down that gets them.
Yeah, definitely. What advice would you give busy people again when it comes to nutrition? Because busy people who are working in the city, their commute to work is long. They probably skip breakfast or grab a coffee on the way in, lunch, and then they're getting home from late from work. Nutrition wise, what advice do you give to your clients to get them ready for their trips?
Throw out the idea of perfection, right? Like perfection probably is not in the cards, and quite frankly isn't necessary to be successful for a lot of this types of stuff, right? The only people that need to be quote unquote perfect with their nutrition are people that are being paid to look a certain way on a certain date. Bodybuilders, actors, models, that type of thing, right? They're the only people that really need, that perfect 100% dialed in nutrition. When I'm working with my clients towards improving their nutrition, usually we're just looking at it in different buckets or categories, right? So one of the first things we look at is, are you, a good, healthy weight for where you want to be to be able to do the things that you want to do? Could you stand to gain some weight? Like, are you super light and don't even have like the requisite muscle mass to be able to carry yourself on this type of adventure? Or are you carrying some unproductive weight that, would benefit to lose? And depending on, which one of those they fall into, we might make some simple adjustments. Like someone that wants to lose weight, oftentimes I'll tell them, okay, one of the first steps we're going to take is actually just slowing down the speed at which you're eating, right? Because if you can slow down how fast you're eating, you're naturally going to eat less, right? And so that's a simple modification that we can make that can yield a very big benefit and very big result without being overly complicated in any way, right? Like we don't need to track all of your macros and track every gram of carbs, fats, proteins, that type of stuff, right? We don't need to track every calorie. We just need to have a general understanding of, what are the behaviors that are going to drive the appropriate change, right? If we are looking at, getting into some specifics, the one thing that I will often have people chasing is a protein goal. So making sure that you are getting enough protein to, fully recover, support your activity, support your body's functions, all of that type of stuff. Most people do not get enough protein to optimize their health, right? And oftentimes when we focus on, improving that protein intake or driving that protein intake up, we naturally see that they tend to start to decrease some of the less beneficial foods that maybe they've been eating as part of their regular nutrition up until that point, right? Just because they're feeling more full, they're feeling more satisfied, right? Protein is a very, very satisfying food group. It's the one that has us feeling the fullest for the longest. And so oftentimes, that's all we really need to focus on. Sometimes it's like, hey, if we just focus on eating slowly and we focus on getting enough protein at each of our meals, the rest will often take care of itself, right? So it doesn't need to be super complicated. We can make this remarkably simple.
Yeah, and I suppose it's just getting people ready before they go on their trip, so they are, because altitude affects your appetite. And when you're in a foreign country, like, the food can disagree with you, like you can have stomach problems when you get there. So just going out there as much as you can at 100%, just so you can kind of, fully hydrated, fueled up. If anything happens, you're still kind of at 95% at that point.
Yes, exactly. Right. So that's, the biggest thing that I always tell people is, our number one goal here is to get you to the trailhead healthy, fit, strong, feeling good. Right. What happens after that? We only have so much control over. And I mean, there are, strategies and tactics and things that we'll talk about in terms of making sure that they're, still trying to cover some of their key bases and that type of stuff. Right. But the most important thing, the biggest thing that you can do to set yourself up for success is to get to the start line, get to the trailhead, get to day one of your adventure as healthy, as fit, as energetic as possible. Right.
Yeah, definitely. And what about how do you advise your clients from a mindset and motivation perspective? Like, do you get involved with that with your clients as well?
Totally. Yeah. So oftentimes we're talking about, self-awareness, mindfulness, the types of habits and practices that can help them, if their mind starts racing, if they start going, falling down a dark path or something like that, questioning, am I going to be able to do this? Blah, 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 all that type of stuff. Right. Pardon me. Making sure we've got strategies and tactics to regain that focus, regain that control over the mind. Looking at things like segmentation and compartmentalization as tactics that we can lean on as well. But oftentimes it will depend on, what is this person's personal history and track record with mindfulness, meditation, mental skills, that type of stuff, right? Sometimes we need to start with the basics and just developing a little bit of a self-awareness and a little bit of a mindfulness practice as one of those key first steps to then unlock the ability to work on all of the other things. Or sometimes it could be, okay, we're actually looking at, rewiring the neural pathways in terms of, okay, you went out on this training hike, you had a negative thought pattern that you fell into. Let's talk about what we can do now to sort of rewrite that pattern and better set you up for success so that the next time you find yourself in a similar situation, you don't fall down that rabbit hole of that negative thought pattern or spiral. And instead, you can, again, refocus, recenter on the things that actually need your focus and attention to be able to drive you forward and keep you safe as you continue taking those steps forward.
Definitely. And then finally, Sean, like, how do you work with your clients in terms of, you said that you sit on Zoom, like, are all your clients in Canada? Like, what is the process of somebody working with you?
Yeah, so most of my clients are in North America, but they're sort of like from coast to coast. I have worked with clients internationally, but again, just because I do try and make a point of getting at least some personal touch points with someone, whether that be by Zoom or telephone or whatever. Obviously you're in the UK, I'm on the west coast of Canada right now. There's a significant time zone difference between us, but we're still able to make this work. You and I, you're at the tail end of your workday. I'm at the beginning of my workday, right? So obviously it can still work. But like I said, when I first start working with someone, we do quite a bit of information gathering. And again, all of that can be done remotely. I have a custom coaching app that I use to deliver the programming and gather a lot of the information with surveys that I've designed and movement screens and that type of stuff that I put together and programmed into the app. So when someone starts working with me, we go through that onboarding assessment process. We get together on a Zoom call, talk through the results, talk through all of the findings, really get clear and make sure we're on the same page about where they are today. Like, what is your starting point? What does your day zero look like? And then, outline what does the path to success on your adventure look like, right? And of course, then it helps to know what is the specific adventure, what is the date, like we can sort of reverse engineer what's going to be necessary from there. But then, I mean, really looking to identify what are, one or two things that we could put in place today that compounded over time are going to yield us a big result and get us to where you want to be in a few months' time, right? Clarify what does that look like in terms of daily action, get that commitment to action, and then, track that on a daily basis. Did you do that action that you said you were going to do today? Check the box. Good, right? We meet via Zoom or phone typically on a weekly basis to check in and say, okay, what were the successes from the past week? What were the challenges from the past week? If there were challenges, what are we going to do differently this week? Or how are we going to better set ourselves up for success at execution and implementation? Or if you crushed it and it's like, hey, that was awesome. Everything went super smooth. I'm feeling super confident. Okay, let's talk about that next step or that next layer that we can add in to continue to move the needle in the direction of success, right? With most of my clients, like I said, we are looking at least some level of structured strength and movement training and maybe some structured cardio. So I deliver all of that via the custom coaching app again as well. And all of that is, 100% individualized to the individual person that I'm working with based on the results of their assessment, based on the particular adventure they're working towards, right? There are no cookie cutter programs. It's, this is a bespoke program built for you to get you from where you are today to ready for that adventure in 16, 18, 26 weeks times, whatever it is, right?
And then just on that, like, what do you think is the perfect time frame? So if someone was starting, today, like, how long would they need to get ready, in your opinion, for like a Kilimanjaro or an Everest base camp trek?
It depends on where their capacity is right now, right? If they're completely sedentary, obviously more time is better. When I'm taking on a new client, the shortest period of time I will work with someone for is 16 weeks. So if they are not in a position to be able to have that amount of time, then, I mean, obviously I would still recommend, like, hey, it's not like you're throwing in the towel. There are things that you should be doing, but I would say 16 weeks is, generally speaking, the minimum time frame that I encourage people to follow a structured plan to prepare for this type of adventure. But generally speaking, more time is better, right? So I was mentioning to you before we hit record here that last year I trained a lady to do the Annapurna circuit by mountain bike as a bike packing trip, right? We trained for 8 months to get her ready for that. And she had a fantastic time. And she was, just so thrilled that she had committed that time in advance to preparing for that adventure, because there were actually multiple people on that trip that did have to turn back and weren't able to push on because of things like altitude sickness and just not having the physical capacity to be able to keep up with the group and that type of thing, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So, Sean, how can people, if people have sat and listened to this episode and want to get in touch with you, and they want to find out more or ask you some questions, how can people get hold of you?
Easiest way is to hit me up on my website, which is backcountrystrength.com. On there, you'll find, information about the coaching service, information about me, as well as a coaching application form that you can fill out. And, I'll get back to you pretty quick, just to gather a little more information and talk about if it seems like it would be a good fit for us to work together. You can also find me on Facebook, Instagram. I am Sean Allt CPT, so SeanAllt CPT. That's how you'll find me on either of those platforms.
Perfect. And finally, one thing I always ask new guests on the Bucketlister podcast is, what is still on your bucket list, Sean?
Oh, fantastic question. So the big item on my bucket list right now is to fast pack the Tour de Mont Blanc. So that is actually something that I am working at getting the logistics organized for summer 2025. But that's something that my wife and I have been talking about for a little while now. So intention is to do that 6 days on trail we're going to take a 0 day in Courmayeur to just unwind and enjoy the town a little bit. But that's the next big thing on our list is the Tour de Mont Blanc.
Perfect. Well, that's a trip we organise and one that we love, and it's a great trekking round there in the Alps in France and Switzerland and Italy. It is just a absolutely stunning trip, and you will have a great time heading over to Europe, I am sure. Well, Sean, thank you ever so much for coming onto the podcast today. I found it super interesting, and I hope everyone listening has also taken something from this podcast in your plans and what you're doing to get ready for your next big adventure. But if you do want to have a conversation with Sean, tap him up on his website, and please do mention that you listen to this podcast here, because that would be amazing for him to know that him coming on to the podcast has had some benefit for him as well. So that would be great. Sean, thank you ever so much. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I'll be back with another episode next week. But until then, thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bucketlister Podcast. Be sure to click follow to be alerted for next week's episode. For more travel inspiration, check us out at www.thebucketlistcompany.co.uk or follow us on socials. See you next time.